The Concord of Vaelth had built their throne hall on a moon that had no name, only a number, and the number was older than most of the species who now sat inside it. 12,000 years of empire had polished the black stone until it drank the light rather than reflected it, so that the delegates seemed to float in a darkness, studded with the cold pinpricks of 100 hanging suns. Every one of those suns was a captured star, dragged across the void and caged in a lattice of gravity, and every one of them was a message. We can move anything. We can take anything. We have been doing this since before your kind learned to walk upright. Into that darkness walked a young woman with a folder of paper under her arm. Paper, actual paper. The delegates of the Concord noticed it the way a shark notices a swimmer's heartbeat, and a ripple of something that was not quite laughter moved through the ranks of the seated powers. Paper meant a species too young for proper data weave. Paper meant a species that still thought in the old slow way, ink drying in the open air, thoughts that could not be edited after they were set down. Paper meant human. Her name was Kesarai Voss, and she was 26 standard years old, which by the arithmetic of the Concord made her barely more than a larva. She had a plain gray uniform with no rank braid, no medals, no honor lights strung through her hair the way the Vaelthi wore theirs. She had short dark hair cut without ceremony, a face that had not yet learned to hide its every thought, and eyes that kept moving across the hall, counting, measuring, remembering. She walked to the center of the floor where a single low disk of stone waited for petitioners, and she stood on it, and she looked up at the tiers of the galaxy rising above her into the dark. Above her on the highest tier sat Overspeaker Ulthnaresh Vale, and the Overspeaker did not bother to rise. "You are the human," the Overspeaker said. The translation field rendered the words in Kesarai's own tongue, but it could not scrub the boredom out of them. "You are the one they sent to speak the offer." "I am," Kesarai said. "Then speak it. We have kept the stars waiting for this. Do not make them wait longer than the joke deserves." Laughter this time opened from every tier. It rolled down the black stone and washed over the young woman on the disk, and she let it wash over her the way a rock lets a wave pass. She did not flinch. She did not smile the false smile of the ingratiating. She simply waited until the sound had spent itself, and then she opened her folder of paper and she began. "Humanity came into your space 14 years ago," she said. "We came the way anyone comes into a house they did not know was occupied. We did not know your borders. When we learned them, we stopped. When your patrol at the Sarin Drift fired on our survey ship and killed 41 people, we did not fire back. When you annexed the 3 worlds we had already settled at Calder's Reach and moved our people into camps, and let 900 of them die of a fever your medicine could have cured in an afternoon, we did not fire back. We sent letters. This is another letter." She turned a page. In all that hall of ancient powers, the small dry sound of paper turning was the only sound. "The offer is this," Kesarai said. "Peace. Recognition of our borders as they stood before Calder's Reach. Return of the survivors of the camps. An end to the raiding of our outer colonies by vessels flying no flag which we both know are yours. In exchange, humanity opens trade. We have things you want. We will sell them at fair price. We will bind ourselves by treaty to keep the peace, and we will keep it because we always keep our word, and that is the whole of the offer. There is nothing hidden in it. There is no trick. It is exactly what it appears to be, which is a young species asking an old one to stop killing it." She closed the folder. For a long moment the Concord of Vaelth said nothing at all, and Kesarai Voss thought, for that one moment, that the silence might be the silence of consideration. It was not. Overspeaker Ulthnaresh Vale leaned forward, and the honor lights in the crest along his skull brightened, and he began to laugh in earnest, not the polite ripple of before, but a deep, grinding, genuine amusement that shook the loose folds of his throat. And when he had laughed enough to be sure that every delegate in the hall had seen him laugh, he spoke, and his voice was warm with the particular cruelty of the very powerful being asked for mercy by the very weak. "Do you know," the overspeaker said, "how many species have stood on that disk, that exact disk of stone where you stand now? 940. 940 times a small frightened thing has climbed up there and read us its little letter and asked us to be kind. And do you know how many of those species still exist?" Kesarai said nothing. "Answer," the overspeaker said pleasantly. "I don't know the number," Kesarai said. 6. The overspeaker held up a hand, and there was more laughter because there were nowhere near 6 digits on it, and he was making the point that even 6 was more than his hand could count. 6, and every one of those 6 is a client, a servant, a hand that reaches into the dark and pulls out what we tell it to pull out and brings it to us and is glad we let it live. The other 934, he closed the hand, read their letters, and then they were educated. That is what this is, child, not a negotiation, an education. He settled back into his seat, and the vast dark hall settled with him, a great animal at rest. "You offer us peace," the overspeaker said, "as though peace were yours to give, as though we were two things of a size. Let me correct the arithmetic of your species, since it is clearly your weakest subject. The Concord of Vaelth commands the labor of 1100 worlds. We have moved stars. You have seen them hanging over your head this whole time, and you have said nothing, because you understand, in whatever passes for understanding in your kind, that a power which can move a star can move you and does not need your permission. We do not want your trade. We do not want your treaty. We do not want your borders, because your borders are already ours, and the only reason your little colonies still fly your little flags is that we have not yet found a use for them. When we find a use, we will take them, and you will not fire back because you never fire back because you cannot." He paused, and the smile that spread across his broad face was almost gentle. "So here is our answer to your offer of peace, human. We refuse it, and I will tell you what we offer instead. You will not return to your ships. You will remain here on this moon, and you will be given to the delegation of the thrashing as a demonstration for the younger clients, so that they may see with their own eyes what happens to a species that mistakes the patience of the strong for weakness. Your people at Calder's Reach will be resettled, all of them this time, not merely the ones we have already taken into the labor worlds, where in 3 generations they will have forgotten they were ever anything but ours. And your homeworld, that blue thing you love so much, we will not destroy it. We are not wasteful. We will simply come and stay and be its owners, and you will thank us for the roads." The hall roared its approval. It was a sound like a landslide, a sound with no bottom to it, the accumulated contempt of 12,000 years given voice all at once, and aimed at a single young woman, standing on a disk of stone with a folder of paper in her hands. And Kesarai Voss, who had known before she boarded her shuttle exactly how this would go, who had been chosen for this room precisely because she could stand inside that landslide of scorn and not be buried by it, waited for the noise to end. And when it had ended, she did something the Concord of Vaelth had not seen in a very long time. She reached up, and she touched a small stud at the collar of her plain gray uniform, and a light on it went from green to red. And she said, in a voice that was not loud, but that the translation field carried into every corner of the hall because the field was ancient and precise, and did not know how to do anything else. "Thank you for your answer. It's been recorded. I want to be sure I have it exactly, because a great many people are going to want to hear it in your own words. You have refused peace. You have promised to enslave a species that came to you with open hands. You've said all of this to my face, and to the faces of your clients, and now it's said, and it can't be unsaid." She closed her folder for the last time. "I came here to give you a chance to be remembered as the ones who chose to stop. You've chosen instead to be remembered as the ones who were warned." The overspeaker's crest lights flickered. It was the smallest thing, a flutter of light, there and gone, but Kesarai saw it, because she had been trained to watch for exactly that. The first crack in the certainty of the very powerful, the first flicker of a creature that has just heard a word it did not expect. "Warned," the overspeaker repeated. And then he laughed again, but it was a half-beat late, and everyone in the hall who mattered heard the half-beat. "Warned. By what? By your paper. By your 41 dead survey crew. Take her to the thrashing." Two towering figures in the black and silver of the Concord's guard moved down from the tiers toward the disc. And Kesarai Voss stood very still, and she let them come, and she thought about a man 300 light-years away, an old friend of her father's, sitting in a dark room in front of a screen, waiting for a light to turn red. She thought, "It's done. It's your part now. And whatever happens to me here, we don't fire first. Remember that. We never fire first." That was the law humanity had made for itself, in the 14 years since it had stumbled into the house of an empire and learned what the empire was. We do not fire first. We do not lie about it afterward. And we never, ever let them believe the offer wasn't real. Because the offer had been real. That was the thing the Concord of Vaelth would spend the rest of its short remaining history failing to understand. The piece Kesarai Voss had held out to them in her folder of paper had been the most sincere thing humanity had ever offered anyone. It had cost them everything to make it. They had swallowed 41 dead, and 900 dead, and 3 stolen worlds, and they had still come with open hands, because they meant it, because a species that had spent its whole bloody history learning what war costs had decided it would rather be humiliated than be the thing that started the fire. And the Concord had laughed and refused, and reached out to take the young woman who had offered it. They had no idea what they had just refused. The guards took her by the arms. She did not resist. As they lifted her from the disc, she looked up one last time at overspeaker Ulfnarish Vale, and she was not afraid, and he saw that she was not afraid. And for the first time in 12,000 years, something cold moved through the Concord of Vaelth, something none of them had a word for, because none of them had needed the word in so long. The word was doubt. Far above the nameless moon, past the cage of captured stars, in the deep quiet where the human ship waited, a communications officer named Del Arroyo watched a single indicator turn from green to red, and felt his stomach drop out of him, and reached for the panel that would send the signal home. He did not send it yet. There was a protocol. There was always, with humans, a protocol, a last chance, a final door left open even now. He keyed the long-range channel one more time, and he broadcast in the clear on every band the Concord used, so that no one could ever say they had not heard it. "This is the human vessel Sparrow to the Concord of Vaelth. Our envoy has been detained after offering you peace in good faith. We are asking one more time, and this is the last time we will ask, for her safe return and for talks to resume. We do not want what comes next. Please, release her. Answer us." The answer came 4 minutes later. It was not words. It was a targeting lock, and then a second, and then 40 more, as the Concord's picket fleet around the moon woke up and turned its attention, lazily, contemptuously, on the single small human ship that had dared to speak twice. Del Arroyo closed his eyes. Then he opened them, and he sent the signal home, and 300 light-years away, in a dark room, an old friend of Kesarai Voss's father read the message, and bowed his head, and gave the order that 14 years of restraint had been building toward. The order was one word long. The word was begin. To understand what the word begin set in motion, you have to go back 14 years, to the day humanity learned it was not alone, and learned in the same afternoon that being not alone was going to be the worst thing that had ever happened to it. The first contact had not been a handshake. It had been a survey ship called the Meridian, out past the edge of the charted lanes, stumbling across a Concord way station the way a hiker stumbles into a bear's den. The Meridian had done everything right. It had transmitted greetings in every mathematical language humanity could imagine a stranger might read. It had powered down its own weapons, such as they were, and broadcast its intentions and waited. The Concord had let it wait for 6 hours while it decided whether the humans were worth the fuel to destroy. Then it had decided they were, on the general principle that unknown things left alive tended to become known things that caused trouble, and it had opened fire, and the meridian had died with its greetings still looping on the open channel. But the meridian had done one more thing right, one thing that would matter more than anyone aboard her could have known. In its 6 hours of waiting, it had listened. It had sat quietly in the dark and recorded everything: the way station's transmissions, its power signatures, the rhythm of its patrols, the specific frequencies its systems sang in. And in the last 90 seconds of its life, as the Concord's fire tore it open, the meridian had bundled all of that listening into a single tight burst and thrown it back toward home like a bottle into the sea. Home had caught the bottle. That was the beginning of the thing humanity did instead of fighting. Because when the analysts back home unpacked the meridian's final burst, they did not find, as they had feared, a picture of a superior technology so far beyond human reach that resistance was pointless. They found something stranger and, in the long run, far more dangerous to the Concord. They found that the Concord of Vaelth was old. Not old as in wise, old as in unchanged. The Empire had conquered its way to dominance 12,000 years ago, and having conquered, it had stopped. Why improve a weapon that already killed everything you pointed it at? Why redesign a ship that had never met an enemy who could scratch it? The Concord's technology was magnificent and ancient and utterly, fatally static. Every ship in its fleet ran on the same architecture, the same protocols, the same deep systems, because those systems had never once failed against an enemy, and the Concord had confused never having failed with never being able to fail. Humanity, listening to the Meridian's last gift, understood something the Concord had forgotten how to fear. A system that never changes is a system that can be learned. And a system that has been learned completely can be spoken to. And a thing that can be spoken to can be told to stop. They called the program Locksmith. It was not a fleet. Humanity could not build a fleet to match the Concord and knew it. 1,000 human worlds against 11,000 conquered worlds was arithmetic even the desperate could not argue with. Locksmith was not steel. It was patience and listening, and the slow, quiet, 14-year work of learning a language no one had spoken to the Concord in 12,000 years, the language of its own machines. Every raider the Concord sent against a human colony, humanity let bleed it, but first it listened. Every patrol that fired on a human ship taught the listeners a little more of the song. The camps at Calder's Reach, where 900 humans died of a curable fever, had been full of listening devices humanity's own people had smuggled inside their own bodies, because the prisoners had volunteered, because they had understood that their suffering was a microphone pressed against the heart of the Empire, and they had chosen to be that microphone even knowing what it would cost them. 14 years of humiliation, 14 years of open hands and swallowed dead. And underneath all of it, in the dark, the patient assembling of a key. The key had a shape by the end. It was a set of instructions, not a virus, nothing so crude. The Concord systems were too alien for a virus, but a sequence of perfectly legitimate commands, spoken in the Concord's own ancient machine tongue, that the Concord ships would obey because they had been built to obey exactly those commands, and had simply never in 12,000 years been given them by anyone who wished them harm. The instructions did not say destroy. Humanity had been very specific about that in a debate that had lasted 3 years and split its worlds nearly in half. The instructions said stop. They said, shut down your weapons, vent your munitions to space, open your cell doors, lower your shields, cut your engines and drift. They were the commands a conquered admiral would give his own fleet if he wished to surrender it intact. And the humans had built a key that could give those commands to every ship in the Empire at once, in a single afternoon, without a shot fired. It was the most terrifying weapon in the galaxy, and it could not kill a single soul. That was the point. That had always been the point. Humanity had looked into the abyss of what it could have built: plagues, gravity weapons, the ugly imaginative cruelties a clever frightened species can dream up, and it had built instead an off-switch. The largest off-switch in history. A way to say to the most powerful empire that had ever existed, no, enough, stop. And to make the empire obey, and to spill not one drop of blood in the making of it obey. But there was a problem with an off switch, and the problem was this: you could only use it once. The moment humanity spoke the key, the conquered would learn the key existed. Their systems would be exposed. Their engineers, however sluggish, would eventually change the locks. The song humanity had spent 14 years learning would be sung once, and then it would be gone, and the conquered would never again be caught silent. So the key could not be wasted on a raid, or a border, or a single stolen world. It had to be used at the one moment, in the one place, where using it would end the whole thing, where it would break not a fleet but the belief that held 1,100 worlds in chains. That was why Kesarai Voss had gone to the nameless moon. She had not gone as a diplomat, though she was one. She had gone as the trigger. The peace offer had been real, that was the part that mattered. That was the part humanity had argued about for 3 years and finally, wrenchingly, agreed on. If the conquered accepted peace, the key would never be spoken. It would be dismantled. Humanity would rather have thrown away the greatest weapon it had ever built than fire the first shot in a war. That was the whole moral architecture of the thing. The offer had to be genuine, or humanity would become the very thing it was trying to survive. But if the conquered refused, if, standing at the exact turning point of the war, with the whole galaxy watching and its clients gathered to learn, the conquered chose contempt over peace and reached out to enslave the young woman who had offered it, then Kesarai's red stud would send its signal, and Del Arroyo would send it home, and the old man in the dark room would say the word, and the key would be spoken. Not to destroy, to stop. The old man's name was Tomarel, and he had been Kesarai's father's oldest friend, and he had held her when she was 3 days old, and he was the one who had insisted, over the objections of half of humanity's councils, that a 26-year-old be sent into the throne hall of the galaxy with nothing but a folder of paper and a stud that turned from green to red. They had wanted to send an admiral. They had wanted to send a fleet marshal, a hero of the border defense, someone with medals and gravitas, and a face the enemy would take seriously. That's exactly why we can't, Toma had told the council, in the argument that decided it. You send an admiral, and the conquered sees a threat, and they posture, and they perform, and the whole thing becomes theater between 2 armies. We're not 2 armies. That's the point we have to make them refuse. We send a young woman with paper and open hands, and we make it impossible for them to see her as anything but weak, and then we let them do to her exactly what they do to everything they think is weak. And the whole galaxy watches them do it. And then we turn the key. Not so we look strong, so they can never again pretend they weren't given the choice. You're using her as bait, someone had said. I'm using her as a witness, Toma had answered. There's a difference, and she understands it better than anyone in this room. Ask her. They had asked her. Kesarai Voss had stood in front of the assembled councils of humanity, a 26-year-old with her father 4 years dead in the raids off Calder's Reach, and she had said, "The offer has to be real or none of it means anything. If I go there thinking I want them to say no, I'll poison it, they'll smell it, and I'll deserve whatever happens. So I'm not going to want them to say no. I'm going to want them to say yes with everything I have. I'm going to stand on that floor and hope, really hope, that they take the hand. And when they don't, because they won't, we all know they won't, then it will be true that we tried. Not a story we tell ourselves. True. And that's the only ground I'm willing to stand on when we turn the key. I want to be standing on something true." The council had sent her. And now she stood in the grip of 2 conquered guards, being carried off the disk of stone toward the delegation of the thrashing, having hoped with everything she had that they would take the hand, having watched them laugh instead. and the word had gone home, and 300 light-years away Tomarel had bowed his head and said begin, and across the 1100 worlds of the Concord of Vaelth, in the deep systems of every ship and every station and every orbital gun, an ancient song that had not been sung in 12,000 years began, very quietly, to play. It started at the edges, where humanity's listening had been thickest. A picket cruiser at the Sarin Drift, the same drift where 41 human surveyors had died, received in its deep systems a command it had been built to obey, a command in the oldest and most trusted layer of its own architecture, a command that carried every authentication the ship knew how to demand. The command said, "Safe your weapons and vent munitions." The cruiser obeyed. Its captain, a Vaelthi officer named Soreth Dunn, was standing on his bridge when it happened, and he watched his own weapon boards go dark one after another, and he did not understand because nothing like this had ever happened, because in 12,000 years nothing like this had needed a name. He shouted orders. The orders did nothing, because the ship was no longer listening to shouted orders. It was listening to the oldest voice in its own soul, and the oldest voice was telling it to be still. And then, all across the vast dark body of the Concord of Vaelth, one ship after another, one station after another, one caged and captured star after another, began to hear the same song, and one after another began to obey. The galaxy did not know it yet, but it had just been told to stop. The dark room where Tomarel said the word begin was not, in fact, very dark. That was one of those things the tellings got wrong afterward, because a dark room made a better story. It was an ordinary operations center on an ordinary human world, well lit, full of tired people who had been awake for far too long, smelling of recycled air and old coffee. And Tomarel was an ordinary-looking old man sitting in an ordinary chair in the middle of it. And the only thing that was not ordinary was what he was waiting for. He had waited 14 years for it. He had been there at the beginning, when the Meridian's final burst came home, and the analysts unpacked it and realized, slowly, over weeks, what they had been given. He had been the one who first said the word locksmith, in a briefing room, half as a joke, and had watched the joke stop being a joke as the room went quiet around him. He had argued for the program when it was one line in a budget nobody believed in. He had argued for it harder when the raids started and the councils wanted a fleet instead, wanted steel they could see, wanted the comfort of a weapon that looked like a weapon. He had said, over and over, in 100 rooms, a fleet buys you a war you lose slowly. The key buys you a peace you can actually keep. And he had been right, and being right had cost him 14 years and a great many nights he did not talk about. It had cost him more than that. It had cost him his oldest friend, Kesarai's father, Kesarai Voss, who had died in the raids off Calder's Reach, one of the 10,000 small deaths humanity swallowed in the long silence, and whose death Tomarel had personally decided not to avenge, because avenging it would have meant firing first, would have meant spending the key early on grief instead of late on purpose. He had made that decision in this same operations center 4 years before, and it had very nearly broken him, and it had not broken him only because Aaron's daughter had come to find him afterward, a 22-year-old with dry eyes, and had said, "You did the right thing. I know you did. Don't you dare undo it now to make yourself feel better." He'd have hated that more than dying. That was the day Tomarel had known who would carry the folder of paper into the throne hall of the galaxy, though he did not tell her for another 4 years, and did not tell her that he had known that long even then. Some things you do not say aloud until it is time. Now it was time, and the light on his own console had turned red. Kesarai stud, relayed home through Del Arroyo on the Sparrow, the signal that meant the offer had been made and refused, and that the Concord had reached out to take the one who offered it. And Tomarel sat in the ordinary well-lit room full of tired people, and he looked at the red light, and he did not move. "Sir," said the woman at the primary console, "the signal's confirmed." The Concord has detained the envoy and lit up the sparrow with targeting locks. Authentication is clean. We're clear to execute locksmith on your word. Tomarel did not give the word. Not yet. There was a protocol, and the protocol was the whole point. The protocol was the difference between humanity and the thing it was about to end. Even now, even with Kesarai in the enemy's hands, even with the sparrow marked for death, there was one more door to hold open. He nodded to the comms officer beside the primary console, and Del Arroyo, 300 light-years away, made the final broadcast, the last chance broadcast in the clear on every band the Concord used. Our envoy has been detained after offering you peace in good faith. Release her. Answer us. Please. The whole operations center listened to that broadcast go out, and then listened to the silence that followed it, and then listened to the report come back 4 minutes later that the answer had been 40 more targeting locks, and not one word. And only then did Tomarel allow himself to feel the thing he had been holding off for 14 years, which was not triumph and was not even anger, but a vast and bottomless grief. Grief for the 41 on the Meridian and the survey ship at the Sarin Drift. Grief for the 900 in the camps. Grief for Kesarai Voss dead off Calder's Reach. Grief for every human who had been asked to swallow a wound and keep the peace. Grief even in some strange, deep chamber of him. For the Concord itself, for the vast, stupid, magnificent empire that had been offered a hand 3 times and had chosen, every time, to bite it, and was about to learn what that choice cost. He grieved all of it at once, for the length of one long breath. And then he opened his eyes, and he said the word, because it was time, because every other door had been held open and closed from the far side, because a species had done everything right for 14 years and been spat on for all of it, and because the only thing left to do was the thing they had built the key to do. Begin, Tomarel said. The word went out. The song began to play across 1100 worlds. And Tomarel sat back in his ordinary chair in his ordinary room and watched the map fill with silence, world by world, fleet by fleet, and the tired people around him began very quietly to understand what they were seeing, and one of them, a young analyst who had joined the program only 2 years before, who had never fully believed it would work, said in a small, stunned voice, "It's working. It's actually, sir, it's working. The whole thing, all of it, it's working." "I know," Tomarel said. "We won," the young analyst said. "We won. After all of it, we—" "No," Tomarel said it gently, but he said it firmly because this was the last and most important thing, the thing he had spent 14 years making sure the program understood, the thing he needed this young analyst to carry forward into whatever galaxy came after. "We didn't win. Get that word out of your mouth and don't let it back in. Winning is what they'd have called it, and the whole point of everything we did was to not be them. We didn't win. We stopped it. There's a girl in that hall right now, Aaron's girl, and she's got a gun pointed at her about now, I'd guess. If I know how these things go, and she's standing there not smiling, because we asked her not to. Because the second we start smiling, we've lost the only thing that was ever worth keeping. So no, we didn't win. Nobody won. We just made it stop. And if you remember one thing from tonight for the rest of your life, remember that there's a difference, and remember that the difference is everything, and remember that it was almost the hardest thing in the galaxy to hold on to, and we held on to it anyway." The young analyst looked at the map full of silence, and looked at the old man in the ordinary chair, and understood, and never forgot. 300 light-years away, in a throne hall under a canopy of stolen stars beginning to depart, a young woman stood on a disk of stone with a gun soon to be pointed at her. And she did not smile. And she never learned, not exactly, what Tomarel had said in that room at the moment she needed it most. But she would not have been surprised by it. It was the same thing she had said to him 4 years before, over her father's unavenged death, turned around and handed back to her across 300 light-years and 14 years of silence. Don't you dare undo it now to make yourself feel better. It was the whole creed of a species that had decided, once and for all, that it would rather be humiliated than become the thing that humiliated it. And it was about to be tested in that hall one final time, at the point of a gun no key could reach. The delegation of the thrashing was not a court. It was a room where the conquered broke things so that other things would watch them break. And it had been doing this for so long that it had refined the breaking into an art with rules and audiences and a sense of pacing. They brought Kesarai Voss into it through a low black door, and the two guards set her on her feet in the center of a floor that sloped very slightly toward a drain, and around her, in a shallow bowl of seating, the younger clients of the conquered had already gathered to learn. She recognized some of them from the throne hall, the 6 surviving species who had once stood on the petitioner's disk and been spared, and their children and their children's children, generations of the once conquered who had been kept alive precisely so that they could be brought to rooms like this and reminded, at intervals, what they had escaped by kneeling. They did not look at her with cruelty. That was the thing she would remember. They looked at her with pity and with a terrible practiced patience, the look of people who have seen this many times and know exactly how it ends and are sorry, in a distant, used-up way, that it must end that way again. A Vaelth in the deep silver of a thrashing master approached her. He was old even by Vaelth standards, his crest gone dim, his movements economical, a craftsman at his bench. "You spoke well upstairs," the thrashing master said, and there was no mockery in it, which was somehow worse than mockery. "Better than most. It will make no difference to what happens here, but I want you to know it was noticed. I have watched 400 years of petitioners. Most weep before they reach this floor. You did not weep. I am curious what you are made of. We will find out together." "You don't have much time," Kesarai said. The thrashing master paused. It was not a thing petitioners said. Petitioners begged or cursed or went silent, but they did not make statements about time, as though time were a resource the room was spending unwisely. "Time," he repeated. "You should be getting reports about now," Kesarai said. "From your fleets, from your border, your systems will be doing something they've never done. I'd check if I were you. It's going to get harder to check the longer you wait." The thrashing master studied her for a long moment. Then, because 400 years had taught him that the ones who behaved strangely were sometimes worth listening to for exactly one sentence before the breaking began, he lifted a hand toward the room's attendant and made a small gesture, an instruction to look outward, to check the channels. The attendant checked, and the attendant went very still. And then the attendant did something no attendant had done in that room in living memory. He crossed the floor without being summoned, and he leaned to the thrashing master's ear, and he whispered, and the thrashing master's dim crest flickered exactly the way the overspeakers had flickered upstairs, the small involuntary light of an old certainty meeting a new impossibility. "What have you done?" the thrashing master said. It was not quite a question. "Nothing that kills anyone," Kesarai said. "I want you to understand that because I think you're going to be one of the ones who has to explain this later, and I want you to explain it right. We haven't fired a shot. We haven't killed a single one of your people. We've asked your ships to stop, and they're stopping. That's all. That's the whole thing. We built a way to say stop, and we tried everything else first, for 14 years, and you laughed at all of it, so now we're saying stop. And your ships are listening because we learned how to talk to them, and you never imagined anyone would bother." Up in the throne hall, the overspeaker was already learning it, and learning it badly. The reports had begun to arrive the way bad news always arrives in a system that has forgotten how to receive it, sideways, in the wrong order, disbelieved. First, a picket at the Sarin Drift had gone silent, and the duty officers had assumed a fault, because faults were the only category they had for a ship that stopped answering. Then 3 more had gone silent in a spreading arc, and the fault theory had strained. Then a border squadron of 40 vessels had reported, in a single panicked burst before it too went quiet, that their weapons had safed themselves, their munitions were venting, their engines were cutting to drift, and their commands were doing nothing, nothing, nothing. And the fault theory had shattered, because 40 ships do not develop the same fault in the same minute. The overspeaker stood in the great dark hall with the captured stars hanging over him, and he watched the map of his empire, a map 12,000 years old, a map that had only ever grown, and he watched a stain of silence spread across it from the human border inward, world by world, fleet by fleet, and he did not understand, and not understanding was an experience so foreign to him that at first he mistook it for anger. "Sabotage," he said. "Find the sabotage, purge the affected systems and restore command." "Overspeaker," said his first engineer, a Vaelthi whose crest had gone entirely dark with something the room did not have a name for, "there is nothing to purge. The commands they are legitimate. They carry every authentication. They come through the deep layer. The ships are not malfunctioning. They are obeying. They are obeying correctly. They believe the orders are ours." "They are not ours." "No, Overspeaker." "Then whose?" The first engineer looked at the map, at the spreading silence, at the origin of the stain, which was the human border, which was the direction from which the small gray woman with her folder of paper had come, and he did not want to say it, because saying it would make it a thing that had happened. "Hers," he said. The word she had used in the hall came back to the overspeaker then, the word that had made his crest flicker, the word he had laughed at a half-beat too late. Warned. He had asked her by what? By your paper, by your 41 dead. And she had not answered, because the answer had not been ready yet. The answer had been a light on her collar going from green to red. The answer had been 14 years long and was arriving now, all at once, across 1,100 worlds. "The fleets at the core," the overspeaker said. "The home fleets, the guns of this moon, tell me they are secure. Tell me this is a thing of the border, a thing of the edges, and that the heart of the conquered still holds." The first engineer checked, and the stain on the map which had begun at the edges was not staying at the edges. It was moving inward faster than sabotage should move, faster than anything should move, because it was not moving at all. It was not spreading from ship to ship like a fire. It was arriving everywhere the humans had ever listened, all at once, a single vast command spoken to every ear that had been taught the song, and the humans had been listening for 14 years, in the camps, in the raids, in the burning survey ships, in the smuggled devices inside the bodies of prisoners who had volunteered to be microphones. They had listened everywhere, so the command arrived everywhere. "The home fleets are safing," the first engineer said. His voice had gone flat, the voice of a creature reading its own death sentence aloud because someone with authority had ordered it read. "The guns of the moon are safing. The overspeaker, the cage. The star cages." Every head in the throne hall turned upward, to the 100 captured suns hanging in the dark, the great symbol of the conquered's power, the stars they had dragged across the void and caged in lattices of gravity to prove there was nothing they could not move and nothing they could not hold. The lattices were powered. The lattices were held in place by systems, and the systems were conquered systems, ancient and unchanged and built to obey the deep commands, and humanity had listened to those too. The commands humanity sent to the star cages were not stop. You cannot stop a caged star. A star is not a weapon that can be safed. It is a fire that has been imprisoned, and a prison that receives the command to open does not make the fire safe. It sets the fire free. But humanity had known that. Humanity had spent 3 years arguing about exactly that, and the command they had built for the star cages was not open and it was not hold. It was the most delicate thing in the entire key, the thing the engineers had wept over, the thing that had nearly split humanity's councils past mending. The command to lower the caged stars gently, along precomputed paths, back down into the deep gravity wells they had been torn from, to unsteel them, to put them back, to spend the next slow years returning every captured sun to the dark it had been taken from, harming no one, killing no one, simply and irrevocably undoing 12,000 years of theft in front of the eyes of every client who had been taught that the theft could never be undone. The first of the 100 stars, high above the throne hall, shivered in its lattice, and then, with a slowness that was somehow more terrible than any explosion, it began to move, not falling, not flaring, but drifting deliberately, along a path no one in that hall had computed, toward a distance from which it would take years to return, if it ever could. The symbol of the Concord's power was leaving. And in the shallow bowl of the thrashing room, far below, the young clients who had been brought to watch a human broken instead watched the light change through the ceiling as the first caged star began its long journey home. They looked at it. And then, one by one, they looked at Kesarai Voss, standing on the floor that sloped toward a drain, and something moved through them that had not moved through the once Concord in 12,000 years. It was hope. And hope in a room built for breaking is the most dangerous thing of all. Captain Soreth Dunn of the picket cruiser Unbroken Word, the ship that had been the first in all the Concord to hear the song, out at the Sarin Drift, stood on his darkened bridge and made a decision that would, in the days to come, save more lives than any battle he had ever fought. He decided to believe what he was seeing. This was harder than it sounds. Every Vaelthi commander was trained from birth to disbelieve weakness in himself and to disbelieve strength in his enemies, and both halves of that training were screaming at Soreth Dunn to declare a malfunction, to blame his engineers, to force the ship back to obedience by will alone. But Soreth Dunn had spent 9 years on the human border, and in those 9 years he had done things he did not speak of. He had shelled colonies. He had turned survey ships to vapor. He had escorted transports of prisoners to Calder's Reach and had not asked what became of them. And somewhere in those 9 years, without ever admitting it to himself, he had begun to understand the humans in a way the overspeaker never would. He had noticed that they never fired first, not once. In 9 years of provocations that would have driven any Vaelthi crew to fury, the humans had absorbed blow after blow and answered with letters, and Soreth Dunn, who was not a stupid creature whatever else he was, had lain awake more than one night wondering what kind of species does that. He had decided in the end that it was not weakness. Weakness breaks. The humans did not break. They absorbed. He had filed the observation away in the part of his mind where dangerous truths were kept, and now, standing on a bridge whose weapons had gone dark by their own choice, he took the truth back out and looked at it. They never fired first, and his weapons were safe, not destroyed. His crew was alive. His ship was drifting, not burning. Whatever the humans had done, they had done the gentlest possible version of it. A species that wanted the Concord dead could have done this, and then, with the Concord's fleets helpless, fallen on them and slaughtered 1,100 worlds without resistance. The humans had every ship in the Empire at their mercy, and they had told those ships to stop and to open their cell doors and to drift. "Comms," Soreth Dunn said. "Is anything still working? Can we listen?" "We can listen, Captain. We can't fire, we can't maneuver, but the receivers are live. They left us our ears." Of course they did, Soreth Dunn thought. They want us to hear. They have always wanted us to hear. That was the whole of it, the whole 14 years, a species standing at our door saying the same thing over and over, and we would not listen, so they built something we could not refuse to hear. "Then listen," he said. "Everything, every band. I want to know what they're saying because I promise you they are saying something." They were saying something. As the silence spread across the Concord and the panic began, humanity opened every channel it had spent 14 years learning, and it broadcast in the clear in the Concord's own tongue and in the tongues of all 6 surviving client species, and in a dozen others besides, a single message repeated calm, without triumph. "This is humanity. Your weapons are safe. Your ships are safe. Your people are alive and will remain alive. We have not fired on you and we will not fire on you. What is happening is not an attack. It is the end of your ability to attack. We offered you peace and you refused it. We are not answering your refusal with war. We are answering it by taking away the war. Your fleets will drift. Your cages will open and the stars you stole will go home. Your prison doors are unlocking across 1100 worlds. No one has to die for this. No one will die for this unless you choose to make them, and you no longer have the means to make them. When you are ready to talk about peace, the same peace we offered you an hour ago, unchanged, still real, we are listening. We were always listening. That was the whole problem. We are still listening now. Sareth Dunn heard the message 4 times before he trusted himself to speak. "Get me the overspeaker's channel," he said quietly. "Priority command. I need to tell him something and I don't think anyone else is going to have the nerve." The message he sent up the chain to the throne hall on the nameless moon was short, and it was the most insubordinate thing a Concord officer had said to the Concord's ruler in 12,000 years. And Sareth Dunn sent it anyway, because he had finally understood something the overspeaker had not. "Overspeaker, this is Captain Dunn, unbroken word, Saren Drift. I have read the human broadcast. I believe it. My ship is unharmed and my crew is alive because the humans chose to leave them so. I request permission to speak plainly. We cannot win this. There is nothing to win against. They are not fighting us. They have taken the fight out of our hands entirely, and they are asking us again for the same thing they asked for an hour ago. I have shelled their colonies. I have killed their people, and they left my crew alive when they could have killed us with a word. I do not understand these creatures. But I understand that we misjudged them completely, and I understand that every minute we spend looking for a way to fight back is a minute we spend proving to them, and to every client watching, that we learned nothing. I recommend we accept the peace. I recommend it now, while accepting is still something we choose and not something we beg for." Dunn out. In the throne hall, the overspeaker read Captain Dunn's message and did not, at first, feel the thing the message was trying to make him feel. He felt insult. A picket captain, a border officer, presuming to recommend surrender to the Concord of Vaelth. His crest flared with the old reflex of the affronted powerful, and he began to compose the order that would strip Sareth Dunn of his command and give him to the thrashing. And then he looked up at the stars. 3 of them were moving now. 3 of the 100 caged suns had begun their long, slow drift back toward the dark, and the light in the throne hall had changed. The cold, perfect starlight of 12,000 years of dominance guttering and shifting, as the symbols of that dominance quietly took their leave. And the overspeaker understood, in the way that a creature understands a thing it has spent its whole life arranging not to understand, that Captain Dunn was right, and that the order to purge the systems would not work, and that the order to fight back could not be obeyed because there was nothing to obey it with, and that the only orders left to him were the order to surrender, which he would not give, or the order to do nothing, which changed nothing. "First engineer," the overspeaker said, "how long, until they change the locks, until we find the layer they are speaking through and close it and take back our fleets?" The first engineer had been dreading the question, because he had already run the calculation, and the calculation was the ruin of everything. "We cannot, overspeaker." "How long?" "You do not understand. It is not a question of time. The layer they are speaking through is the deep layer. It is the layer everything is built on. It has never changed because it has never needed to change, and it is woven through every system on every ship on every one of our worlds, 12,000 years deep. To close it, we would have to rebuild the foundation of every machine in the Concord simultaneously, while the machines are being commanded against us. We would have to change what our own civilization is made of faster than they can speak to it, and they have already spoken to all of it. There is no how long, overspeaker. There is only after. And in the after, we are a people whose machines belong to someone else, until we build ourselves anew from the ground, which is the work of generations, if it can be done at all. The overspeaker was quiet for a long time. "They planned this," he said at last. The paper, the child with her folder, the 41 dead they did not avenge, the 900 in the camps they let die, all of it. It was all. He stopped, because the word he wanted was listening, and he could not make himself say it, because saying it would mean admitting that the Concord of Vaelth had spent 14 years being studied by a thing it had thought too small to study it, that every act of contempt had been a gift the humans accepted and used, that the Empire had taught the key its own shape one cruelty at a time. They let us do it to them, he said instead, so that they could learn us. Yes, overspeaker. And the peace, the offer, if we had accepted it this afternoon an hour ago when the child stood on the disc, would they have? They said the offer was real, the first engineer said. Everything else they have told us has been true. Their weapons were safe when they said they were safe. Their broadcast said no one would die and no one has died. They have not lied to us once, overspeaker, in 14 years, not once, and we called that weakness. I think the offer was real. I think if we had taken her hand, the key would never have been spoken, and we would never have known it existed, and we would have gone on believing we were the strongest thing in the galaxy, and we would have been wrong, and it would not have mattered that we were wrong, because they would have let us keep believing it, so long as we stopped killing them. And now they have shown us the key because we made them, and a key that has been shown can be used again. And they will never again let us believe we are the strongest thing in the galaxy, because we are not, and they have proven it in front of every client we ever conquered, and there is no unproving it. The overspeaker looked at the moving stars, and for the first time in 12,000 years, the Concord of Vaelth was afraid, and did not know what to do with the fear, because it had spent 12,000 years making sure it would never need to know. Far below, in the thrashing room, Kesarai Voss watched the light change through the ceiling and waited, and did not gloat, because she had been told the most important thing of all before she boarded her shuttle, and she had promised her father's oldest friend that she would remember it no matter what happened in that room. The most important thing was this: when they begin to break, do not smile. They will be looking for the smile. They need the smile because the smile makes them the victim and you the tyrant, and then the whole thing becomes just another turn of the same old wheel. Give them nothing to point at. Be the thing they cannot make into a villain no matter how hard they try. Be, to the very end, exactly what we said we were, a species that would rather be humiliated than cruel. So Kesarai Voss watched the stolen stars go home, and her face was still, and there was no triumph in it, and the young clients in the bowl of seeding watched her not triumph and understood it, and understanding it began, quietly, terrified, hardly daring to stand. There was a moment, in the long collapse of that afternoon, when the Concord of Vaelth might still have believed it could fight, and the moment belonged to a fleet marshal named Orvin Cothrell, who commanded the home fleets at the core, and who had spent his entire life preparing for a war that had just refused to be a war. Orvin Cothrell was, by every measure the Concord respected, the finest military mind of his generation. He had crushed the Ashbourne revolt. He had broken the silent coalition at the Battle of the Nine Gates, a victory still taught to Vaelthi cadets as the perfect application of overwhelming force. He believed in force the way other creatures believe in gravity, not as a preference but as a law of the universe, a thing that simply was, that could not be argued with, that always won in the end if you were willing to apply enough of it. And when the reports began to arrive at his command station, deep in the core, that the border fleets were going silent, Orvin Cothrell did exactly what a lifetime of victories had taught him to do. He reached for force. Full readiness, he ordered. All home fleets. Whatever is happening at the border, it stops at the core. Ready the 9th. Ready the 11th. Prepare a punitive expedition to the human worlds. I want their homeworld's coordinates loaded, and I want the fleets that will turn it to slag standing by within the hour. We will answer this. We will answer it so thoroughly that in 10,000 years, the memory of it will keep every client on its knees. His command staff moved to obey, And then, one by one, they stopped because the ships would not answer. "Fleet Marshal," said his flag captain, and her voice had the particular flatness of a professional watching her profession become meaningless. "The 9th is not responding to readiness orders, nor the 11th. Their weapon systems report saved. Their munition bays report venting. Their Fleet Marshal, they are reporting the orders as coming from us, from this station, from your own command authority. They believe we told them to stand down." "I did not tell them to stand down." "No, Fleet Marshal. But the ships believe you did, and they cannot be made to believe otherwise, because the belief is written into the layer beneath belief, and there is no order I can give that goes deeper than the one already given." Orvin Cothrell stood in his command station at the core, the finest military mind of his generation, and he watched the greatest concentration of firepower in the history of the galaxy quietly disarm itself around him. And he did the thing that made him, in the end, a better creature than his overspeaker, he thought. He did not rage. Rage was a tool for enemies who could be intimidated, and there was no enemy here to intimidate. There was only a silence spreading that answered rage with the same indifference it answered everything. He did not blame his staff. He looked at the problem the way he had looked at the 9 gates, coldly from above, and he asked himself the question a lifetime of force had never once required him to ask. What if force is not the answer? What if force is not even a question that applies? And once he had asked it, the whole shape of the thing came clear to him, faster and more completely than it would ever come clear to the overspeaker. Because Orvin Cothrell had spent his life studying how battles are won and lost, and he recognized, when he finally let himself see it, a defeat more total than any he had ever inflicted. The humans had not outfought the conquered. They had made fighting impossible. They had not defeated the home fleets. They had removed the home fleets from the category of things that could fight, gently, without a scratch. And in doing so they had defeated not this fleet or that fleet, but the entire idea of the fleet, the whole 12,000-year proposition that force was the deepest law of the universe. Orvin Cothrell had built his life on that proposition. And he watched it end, and he understood that it was ending, and he did the hardest thing a creature who has built his life on a false idea can do. He accepted that the idea was false. "Open a channel to the humans," he said. "Fleet Marshal, open it, on my authority, whatever that is still worth. I wish to speak to whoever is holding the key, not to negotiate. I have nothing to negotiate with. They have taken everything I could have bargained. I wish to understand. I have spent my whole life mastering a thing, and I have just learned that the thing I mastered was the wrong thing, and I would like, before whatever comes next, to hear the right thing spoken by someone who understood it before I did." The channel opened, and a human voice answered, not Kesarai's. A technician, one of the listeners, a woman named Priya Anand, who had spent 9 years of her life learning the song and who now found herself, to her own astonishment, speaking directly to the Fleet Marshal of the Conquered's home fleets. "This is humanity," she said. "Go ahead, Fleet Marshal." "You have disarmed my fleets," Orvin Cothrell said. "The finest fleets that have ever existed, without a shot. I wish to know how, and I wish to know why you did not simply destroy us, since you plainly could have." And Priya Anand, who had helped build the key, who had wept over the Starcage command with the rest of them, gave the Fleet Marshal the answer that would, in time, help remake his whole people. "The how doesn't matter, Fleet Marshal. It was 14 years of listening, and you gave us 14 years because you never imagined we were worth watching. The why is the only part that matters, so listen to it. We didn't destroy you because destroying you was the easy thing, and we've spent our whole history learning where the easy thing leads. It leads to more of you. Every empire that's ever burned another empire down just became the next empire, and then someone burned it down, and around, and we decided, a species that had done plenty of its own burning, believe me, we decided we were tired of the wheel. So we built a way to stop the wheel instead of turning it one more time. That's all this is. Not a victory. A stop. You reached for our throat for 14 years and we finally caught your hand. And instead of breaking it, we're holding it. And we're going to keep holding it until you understand that we could let go and choose not to hurt you, which is a thing you never learned to do, and which you're going to have to learn now, because we're not going to do your learning for you. That's the why, Fleet Marshal. We didn't kill you because we wanted you to have to live with having been shown mercy. It's the heaviest thing there is. Carry it well. Orvin Cothrell was silent for a long moment. I broke the silent coalition at the 9 gates, he said at last, and I let none of them live, and I called it strength, and it was taught to our young as strength for 400 years. I begin to think I have taught 400 years of our young the wrong lesson. Then teach them a new one, Priya Anand said. You've got time, we left you alive. That was the whole point. And Fleet Marshal Orvin Cothrell, finest military mind of his generation, gave the last order of his career as a servant of the conquered, an order that no key had forced on him, that came from no deep layer, that was his own and freely given. He ordered every ship of the home fleets that could still hear him to hold their fire, to make no move against the humans or against the rising clients, to open their own brigs and free their own prisoners, and to await, in peace, the terms of whatever galaxy came next. And then he took off the black and silver, and he became a teacher, and he spent the rest of his long life traveling the freed worlds telling the young of every species the true story of the 9 gates, not as a victory, but as a warning, until the warning was better known than the victory had ever been, which was the only apology a creature like Orvin Cothrell knew how to make, and which was, in the end, enough. The first client to stand fully upright in the thrashing room was an old female of a species called the Alan, a low, wide, patient people who had been among the 6, spared 940 petitioners ago. Her name was Geshmo Alan, and she had been coming to rooms like this one for 200 years, brought again and again to watch the breaking of others, so that she would never forget the terms of her own survival. She had watched a great many things die on that sloped floor. She had watched them beg and curse and go silent, and she had learned to keep her face perfectly still through all of it, because the conquered watched the clients as closely as it watched the petitioners, and a client whose face showed the wrong thing might find itself invited to the floor in turn. 200 years of stillness. 200 years of a face that showed nothing while her own memory of a free world, a world with an Allah name she was forbidden to speak aloud, grew thinner and grayer inside her like a photograph left in the sun. And now she stood in a room where standing without permission was itself a kind of death, and she looked at the light of the stolen stars going home, and she looked at the human child who was not smiling, and she opened her mouth, and she spoke aloud, for the first time in 200 years, the forbidden name of the world the conquered had taken from her. She said it once, and then she said it again louder. And around her in the bowl of seating, the other clients, the children and grandchildren of the once conquered, who had been brought here to be reminded of their smallness, began, one by one, to speak their own forbidden names, the names of their own taken worlds, a rising tide of names that had not been spoken aloud in the Concord of Vaelth in 12,000 years, because the conquered had forbidden them, because a name is a claim, and a claim is a hope. And hope in the conquered is the one thing an empire cannot allow. The thrashing master, old craftsman of 400 years of breaking, stood in the middle of that rising tide of names and understood that his room had ended. Not been overthrown, no one had touched him, no one had raised a hand. His room had simply stopped being a place where breaking happened, because the audience had remembered that they were not an audience, they were the broken, and the broken had just watched the thing that broke them lose its grip on the entire galaxy at once. He looked at Kesarai Voss. She looked back at him, and the thrashing master, to his own lasting astonishment, did the arithmetic of the new galaxy faster than his overspeaker ever would, and made the only choice that would let him live in it with any part of his dignity intact. He stepped back from her. He lowered his craftsman's hands, and he said in the old formal Vaelth of the thrashing the words that closed a session, but he did not say them over her as he had said them over 900 others. He said them over himself. "The thrashing is ended," he said. "There is nothing here to break." And he turned, and he walked out of the low black door, and he did not look back. And Kesarai Voss stood in the center of a room full of the once conquered speaking the names of their stolen worlds. And she did not smile, and she raised her voice just enough to be heard over the rising names, and she said, "Your doors are open, all of them, everywhere, right now. Nobody's holding them anymore. If you want to go home, go home. We'll help you find the way. That's a promise, and we keep our promises. But nobody has to be broken here, and nobody has to break anybody back. That part's over. It's been over for about 11 minutes. Go home." Gesh Moalan crossed the sloped floor to stand in front of the human child, and she looked at her for a long moment with eyes 200 years old, and she said, in a voice cracked with disuse and wonder, "Why did you not simply kill them? You could have. We would not have stopped you. We would have helped." "Because then we'd be them," Kesarai said. "And then somebody someday would have to build a key to stop us. We didn't want to start that. We just wanted it to be over." The old island looked at her for a moment longer. Then she reached out one wide patient hand and touched the human's shoulder. Gently, the way you touch a thing you are afraid is not real. And she said the only blessing her people had left after 12,000 years of having their blessings forbidden. And it did not translate, and Kesarai did not need it to. Across the 1100 worlds of the Concord of Vaelth, the same thing was happening in 10,000 rooms at once. The prison doors were opening, not blown open, not stormed, simply unlocked. The great automated locks of the labor worlds receiving in their deep systems a command they had been built to obey and obeying it, sliding open across whole continents of camps, so that the enslaved of 1100 worlds walked out into the light past guards whose weapons had gone dark in their hands. The guards did not fire because they could not fire, and finding they could not fire, most of them discovered they did not especially want to, that the wanting had been a thing the weapons did for them, and without the weapons the wanting drained away and left behind only tired people who had been doing an ugly job for a long time, and were, in a way they would never admit, relieved to be unable to do it anymore. At Calder's Reach, where 900 humans had died of a curable fever, the surviving prisoners of the camps walked out through open gates, and among them were the ones who had carried the listening devices inside their own bodies, the volunteers, the microphones, and they looked up at the sky as the local star cage. For Calder's Reach had won. A small stolen sun the conquered had hung there as a warning, began its slow drift home, and they understood before anyone told them. That the 14 years had ended, and that they had helped end it, and some of them wept, and some of them laughed, and some of them simply sat down in the open gateway and could not move for a long time. And on world after world, the clients rose. Not in violence, humanity's broadcast repeated across every band, "No one will die for this unless you choose to make them." And the clients had lived 12,000 years under the conquered's cruelty and had no wish to become it. They rose the way water rises, patiently, filling every space the receding empire left behind. They took back their governments, their cities, their names. They pulled down the honor lights of the conquered and did not replace them with new masters. In 100 places, the local conquered officials, finding their fleets drifting and their guns dark and their prisons empty, simply stopped being officials, took off their black and silver, and became, overnight, ordinary people in a galaxy that had changed while they weren't watching. It was the largest liberation in the history of the galaxy, and not one shot was fired to accomplish it, and that was the thing that would be told and retold for 10,000 years, in 10,000 rooms, in 10,000 tongues. The day the strongest empire that ever existed was ended by a species that refused to fire first, and the empire fell not in fire but in silence, and the silence was the sound of a key being turned in a lock. But the Concord of Vaelth was not yet done. Empires do not end in an afternoon, whatever the poets say. The body dies, but the reflexes twitch on, and the most dangerous moment in the fall of any great power is not the fall itself, but the instant after, when the powerful, feeling the ground go out from under them, reach for the one weapon they have left and discover it is the worst one. And the Concord of Vaelth, in the throne hall on the nameless moon, with its fleets adrift and its clients rising and its stolen stars going home, still had one weapon that the humans, for all their 14 years of listening, had not been able to reach. The overspeaker had a personal guard, not ships, not systems. Living bodies armed with weapons that were not connected to any deep layer, weapons old and crude and mechanical, kept precisely because they could not be spoken to. 1,200 of them, in the black and silver, standing in the tiers of the throne hall around their ruler as the stars went home over his head. And the overspeaker, feeling the galaxy slip out of his 12,000-year grip, reached for the one weapon the humans could not turn off, and he gave an order to his personal guard, and the order was this: "Bring me the human child, the one from the thrashing. Bring her here alive and put her where I can see her, because if I am to lose the galaxy, I will at least not lose it to a creature who gets to keep her hands clean. If they will not fight me, then I will make them fight me. I will make her something they have to avenge. Bring her here, and we will see how sincere their peace is when I hold the knife to the one who offered it." To understand what humanity's restraint actually meant, not as a principle, but as a thing that happened to real people on real worlds, you have to leave the throne hall entirely and travel to a world called Kesarai, which the Concord had held for 9,000 years, and which is as good an example as any of the 10,000 worlds that were freed that afternoon. Kesarai had been beautiful once. In the old records, the Concord had not bothered to destroy because it did not fear memory. It had been a world of terraced cities climbing green mountains, of a people called the Kesarai who had built with light and water, and had made, before the Concord came, some of the most delicate art in that arm of the galaxy. The Concord had come 9,000 years ago and had found the terraced cities inconvenient and the delicate art meaningless, and it had strip-mined the mountains and paved the terraces and put the Kesarai to work pulling ore out of their own sacred ground, and it had hung, in orbit above them, a small stolen star, so that every Kesarai who ever looked up would see the proof of what could be taken and never gotten back. For 9,000 years, the Kesarai had looked up at the stolen star. It had become a part of their language. To say a thing was impossible, they said it was as far as the caged sun. To say a wound would never heal, they said it burned like the second sky. 9,000 years of a people teaching their children, in the very grammar of their tongue, that some things are taken forever. On the afternoon the key was spoken. The overseer of Kesarai was a Vaelthi named Voss, a middling functionary who had drawn the posting as a punishment for some forgotten failure, and had spent his tenure hating the mud and the ore and the flat gray sky. Voss was not a monster. That was, in a way, the horror of him. He did not enjoy the labor camps. He simply administered them, the way one administers a tedious file, signing the quotas and the punishments and the death lists without malice and without much thought. A small, dull man doing a small, dull job that happened to grind a people to powder. When the reports reached Voss that the border fleets had gone silent, he assumed it was someone else's problem. When the reports reached him that the camp locks were failing, he assumed it was a maintenance fault and sent an angry query up the chain that no one answered because everyone up the chain was watching their own world end. And when he looked out the window of his gray administrative tower and saw the camp gates standing open, and the Kesarai walking out of them into the open air, and his own guards standing among them with dark dead weapons in their hands making no move to stop them, Voss felt, for the first time in his tenure, something that was almost fear, and beneath the fear, something he did not recognize because he had never had cause to feel it, which was the beginning of shame. He went down. He did not know why he went down. He told himself later it was to restore order, but there was no order to restore and no means to restore it. And the truth was that some part of Keldros, the part that was not a dull functionary, needed to be among the people he had ground to powder at the moment the grinding stopped, needed to see their faces, needed, though he could not have said it, to be judged. They did not judge him. That was the thing that broke Keldros, that finished the work the human broadcast had begun. He walked out among the freed Seravi expecting rage, expecting the wide, dull man's death he probably deserved, and instead he found a people who were not looking at him at all. They were looking up. The stolen star of Seravit had begun to move. 9,000 years it had hung there, the second sky, the proof that some things are taken forever, woven into the grammar of a whole people's despair. And now, gently, along a path no Seravi had computed and no Seravi had dared to dream, it was leaving. It was going home. And the Seravi stood in the open air outside their unlocked cages and watched the impossible thing, the as far as the cage sun thing, come loose from its lattice and begin the long, slow journey back into the dark it had been stolen from. And a sound went up from them that Keldros would hear for the rest of his life. Not a cheer, not a roar, but a low rising note, 10,000 throats at once, the sound of a grammar of despair breaking apart in real time. The sound of a word that had meant forever discovering that it had been wrong. An old Seravi near Keldros, a woman bent double from 9,000 years of her people's labor pressed into a single lifetime of it, turned and saw the overseer standing among them, and she looked at him, and Keldros braced for the judgment. "Do you see it?" she said. "That was all. Do you see it going home?" "I see it," Keldros said. "For 9,000 years, you told us it could never come down." "I know." "You were wrong." She said it without triumph, the way you'd correct a child's arithmetic. "It's coming down. It was always able to come down. Someone just had to be willing to bring it home, instead of hanging it over our heads." And she turned back to the sky, dismissing him, because he was not important anymore, because the important thing was the second sky coming loose after 9,000 years. And Keldros stood in the middle of a liberation he had done nothing to earn and everything to prevent. And he wept, and no one comforted him, and no one hurt him. And that indifference was the most merciful and the most terrible thing that had ever happened to him. Later, when the humans came to Seravit to help, and they did come, everywhere, not as conquerors but as the unlikeliest of allies, bringing medicine for the fever camps and engineers to unbuild the mines and archivists to help the Seravi recover the old records of the terraced cities before 9,000 years of memory, faded past recall, Keldros went to them. And he confessed everything, the quotas and the punishments and the death lists signed without thought, and he asked to be punished. Because he needed the punishment the way a drowning creature needs the shore. And the human who heard his confession, a quiet field administrator named Ovono Bright, listened to all of it and then said, "I'm not going to punish you. I know that's what you want, and I'm not going to give it to you, because you want it so you can feel like it's over, and it's not over. Here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to stay on Seravit. You're going to help rebuild the terraces you paved. You're going to work for these people, under these people, for as long as they'll have you, and you're going to do it with no reward and no forgiveness, because forgiveness is theirs to give and not mine, and probably not yours to receive for a long, long time. That's not mercy, Keldros. Mercy would be letting you die and calling it justice. This is the harder thing. This is you having to live and having to be useful to the people you hurt, until the day you understand what you did, really understand it, not just feel bad about it, and that day might not come for 30 years. We left you alive. Now you have to earn the air. That's the deal. That was always the deal. It's the same one we offered your overspeaker, and it's the same one we're offering you, and it's the only one we've got, because it's the only one that doesn't just start the whole thing over again." Keldros stayed on Seravit. He rebuilt terraces for the rest of his life. He was never forgiven, and he stopped needing to be, somewhere around the 20th year, which the humans could have told him was exactly the point at which the earning began to work. And every night of that long penance he looked up at a sky that grew emptier and cleaner as the stolen star drew further away, going home. And he understood, a little more each year, what it had cost a species to choose this, to catch the throat of an empire and hold it and refuse, day after day, world after world, to squeeze. That was humanity's restraint on the ground made real. Not a slogan, but 10,000 Keldrosses left alive and made to earn the air, and 10,000 old Seravi women watching an impossible star come home, and a young diplomat 3 worlds away who had made all of it happen and had promised, before she ever boarded her shuttle, that when it came she would not smile. They came for her with the old weapons. Kesarai Voss was still in the thrashing room, among the clients speaking their forbidden names, when the low black door opened again, and a wedge of the overspeaker's personal guard came through it. And these were not the ordinary guards whose weapons had gone dark. These carried the crude mechanical arms the Concord kept for exactly this: chemical-driven slug throwers, blades, weapons with no deep layer to speak to, weapons that worked because a finger pulled a trigger and a hammer fell, and a thing of metal moved very fast through the air, and no key humanity had ever built could reach a thing that simple. The clients saw them and went still, the old stillness, the 200-year stillness snapping back over their faces out of long habit. Geshmoalan moved to put her wide body between the guards and the human child, and Kesarai reached out and stopped her, gently. "Don't," Kesarai said. "Please, it's all right. This is the part I came for too." "They will kill you," the old Alan said. "Maybe," Kesarai said, "but they can't make it mean what they want it to mean. That part's already lost to them. Let them do what they're going to do, just remember it right. Tell it right afterward. That's all any of this was ever about, somebody remembering it right." She let the guards take her. They brought her back up through the black moon, up the long spiraling ways to the throne hall, and it was a different journey than the one down had been. On the way down she had been a curiosity, a joke, a small thing being carried to its education. On the way up she passed Concord officials pressed against the walls of the corridors watching their empire end on the screens in their hands, and they looked at her as she passed, this small gray human between the guards, and there was no contempt left in the looks. There was fear, and there was a dawning, sickened understanding, and on 1 or 2 faces there was something that might, in a person capable of it, have grown into shame. They brought her into the throne hall and put her on the disk of stone again, the petitioner's disk, the same disk where she had read her letter an hour before. But now the hall was different. The captured stars were leaving, a dozen of them moving now, the light guttering and shifting, the perfect cold constellation of the Concord's dominance coming apart overhead. The tiers of delegates were half empty, the client species having risen and departed, the lesser powers having fled to their own worlds to see what could be saved. What remained was the overspeaker, and his 1,200 guards with their old crude weapons, and his first engineer, and a scattering of the truly loyal or the truly trapped, and above them all the stolen stars going home. The overspeaker sat on his high seat and looked down at the young woman on the disk, and he had a slug thrower of his own now, an ancient ceremonial thing, and he held it in a way that said he knew how to use it. "You have taken everything," the overspeaker said. "In an afternoon, 12,000 years, and you have taken it in an afternoon with no ship and no army and no shot fired. I will confess something to you, human, because there is no longer any reason not to confess things. I do not understand what has happened. I understand each piece of it. I do not understand the whole. How does a thing so weak?" "We're not weak," Kesarai said. "We never were, that was the mistake. You saw us not fire back and you thought it was because we couldn't. It was because we chose not to. Every single time. 41 dead at the Sarin Drift and we chose not to. 900 dead in the camps and we chose not to. Every raid, every stolen world, every time you spat on the offer, a choice, not a weakness. You spent 14 years watching us make the hardest choice a species can make over and over, and you thought you were watching cowards. You weren't. You were watching people decide again and again that they'd rather bleed than become you. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing there is. It's just quiet so you couldn't hear it. And now you have your revenge. No, she said it flatly, and it landed in the great emptying hall with a weight that made even the guards shift. There's no revenge here. Look at your ships, they're drifting, not burning. Look at your people, they're alive. Every one of them. Look at your prisons, they're open. And the people walking out of them aren't killing their guards because we asked them not to, and they're better than you thought they were too. There's no revenge, overspeaker. Revenge is what you'd have done. We didn't do that. We took away your ability to keep hurting people, and we left everything else exactly where it was, alive. And we did it without spilling one drop of blood. And the reason we did it that way, the whole reason, the reason we argued about for 3 years, is so that when it was done, we could stand here and mean it when we say, it's over now and nobody won and nobody has to die, and the only thing that ended today was the killing. That's not revenge. That's the opposite of revenge. That's the thing revenge could never build. The overspeaker raised the slug thrower and pointed it at her. Then I will give you a war after all, he said. I will kill the one who offered peace, in front of the record you are so proud of, and your species will have to answer it. And then you will be at war whether your fine principles like it or not. And we will see how long your gentleness survives the death of your own child. And Kesarai Voss looked into the barrel of the old crude weapon that no key could reach, and she did not flinch, and she said the last thing she had prepared, the thing she and Toma Rel had written together in the dark room before she left, the thing that was aimed not at the overspeaker at all, but at every ear in the galaxy that was, even now, still listening. If you shoot me, nothing changes. That's what I need you to understand before you decide. We won't come to avenge me. There's no fleet coming. I made them promise. Before I left, I made them promise that if you killed me, they wouldn't answer it with death. Because if they did, then you'd have finally won the only thing you could still win, which is turning us into you. So shoot me if you want. Kill the one who offered peace. And watch what we do, which is nothing, which is exactly nothing, except keep the doors open and help the freed find their way home and go on refusing, one more time, to be the thing you are. You can end my life, overspeaker. You cannot end what it means. That's already out of your hands. It's been out of your hands for 14 years. You just found out today. The throne hall was silent, except for the faint, deep hum of the stolen stars departing. And the overspeaker of the Concord of Vaelth, ruler of 1,100 worlds, holder of 12,000 years of dominance, stood on his high seat with an ancient weapon pointed at a young woman who would not flinch, and who had just taken from him the last thing he had left, the ability to make his own murder mean something. Because she was right. If he killed her and humanity did nothing, then his murder would be exactly what she said it was. Not a spark, not the start of a war, just one more piece of proof that the conquered had learned nothing, that it had been offered peace 3 times and answered with cruelty 3 times, that it was, in the final account, nothing but a thing that hurt people until someone quietly took away its hands. His finger was on the trigger. And it was one of his own guards who broke first. A young Vaelth of the personal guard, barely more than a larva by the Concord's arithmetic, not much older in his own species' years than Kesarai was in hers, lowered his crude weapon, and then set it on the black stone floor, and the small clatter of it was the loudest sound in the hall. And he said, in a voice shaking with the terror of what he was doing, "Overspeaker, I will not. I have watched. I have listened to their broadcast. They left my brother's ship alive when they could have killed it. My brother is alive tonight because of the mercy of the thing you want me to help you murder. I will not. And I do not think, overspeaker, I do not think any of us will." And down the tiers, one after another, in ones and twos, and then in a long rippling wave, the personal guard of the overspeaker of Vaelth set down their weapons. It was not a mutiny. No one raised a hand against the overspeaker. They simply, 1,200 of them, declined to be the instrument of the last cruelty, because they had watched the human child refuse to become cruel even with the whole galaxy handed to her, and they found, to their own astonishment, that they would rather be like her than like the thing they served. And the overspeaker of Vaelth stood alone on his high seat, with his ancient weapon and his departing stars and his empty empire, and he understood at last, fully in the whole and not merely the pieces, that he had lost not the galaxy which he had already lost, but the argument, the deep argument, the 12,000-year argument about what strength was, and that he had lost it to a species that had answered his every cruelty with an open hand, and that his own guards could see it, and that there was no shot he could fire that would win it back. Slowly, the overspeaker lowered the weapon. And then, because there was nothing else left, because the arithmetic of his ruin was complete and every other road was closed, the ruler of the Concord of Vaelth did the thing that no ruler of the Concord had done in 12,000 years, the thing that the title of every telling of this day would remember, the thing the whole galaxy had refused to imagine possible an hour before when it laughed at a young woman with a folder of paper. He began to beg. "Stop it," the overspeaker said. For a moment Kesarai was not sure she had heard him, because the words were so small, and the mouth they came out of had been so large an hour before. "The stars," the overspeaker said, "the prisons, the ships, stop it, put them back, give it back." "I will," his crest lights, the great crown of honor lights that had blazed with contempt when he laughed at her paper, guttered now like candles in a wind. "I will accept the peace, the offer, the one you made, I accept it. The borders, the survivors, the trade, all of it, as you said it, unchanged, I accept it. Only stop this, only leave us something, only do not let it all." He stopped because he had heard himself, and what he had heard was a thing begging. And here was the moment. Here was the moment Tom Morell had spent 3.5 years of humanity's council's patience preparing her for, the moment that every instinct in every species in the galaxy would have answered one way, the moment the old wheel turned and offered, one more time, its ancient invitation, to gloat, to make him say it again, to hold the key over his head and extract, drop by drop, the price of 14 years of contempt, to be, at last, the strong one standing over the weak one, and to enjoy it. Kesarai Voss did not take the invitation. "The offer's still real," she said quietly. "It was always still real. That's what I told you an hour ago, and it was true then, and it's true now. You don't have to beg for it. You never had to beg for it. You just had to take it." She touched the stud at her collar, the same stud, green again now, the connection still open to a communications officer named Del Arroyo on a small ship past the cage of stars, and through him to a dark room 300 light-years away where an old man waited. "But I have to tell you the truth about the stars," she said, "because we always tell you the truth, and I won't stop now just because it's a harder truth than you want. Some of it can't be put back. The ships, yes. When there's a real peace, a signed peace, we'll wake your fleets and give them back to you, drifting and whole and yours. The prisons stay open. Those aren't going to close again, not ever, and I think if you're honest you'll be glad of it someday. But the stars," she looked up at the dozens of them moving now, the great constellation of stolen suns coming apart across the roof of the hall. "The stars are going home. That one we can't undo, and we wouldn't if we could. You stole them to prove you could hold anything. We're putting them back to prove that nothing's held forever. They'll take years. Some of them will take longer than your reign or mine. But they're going home, and the galaxy's going to watch them go, one at a time, for a generation, and every time one of them settles back into the dark where you took it from, everyone who sees it is going to remember what today was. That's not a punishment, overspeaker. That's a memory. We're building you a memory so that this never has to happen again, so that no empire ever looks at a small thing with open hands and thinks it's safe to laugh." "You are ruining us," the overspeaker said, but there was no force in it now, only exhaustion. "No," Kesarai said, We're ending you. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. Ruining you would be leaving you dead. We're leaving you alive and small and free to be something better than you were if you can find it in you, which honestly I don't know if you can, but that's yours to find out, not ours to decide. Every one of your people is alive tonight. Every one of ours that you didn't already kill is alive tonight. 1,100 worlds are free tonight, and not one of them is on fire. You called it an education this afternoon. You are going to educate me and the clients about what happens to the weak. So here's the lesson, and it's the last thing I'll say to you, and I want the record to have it clean. The weak thing was never us. It was you. It was the strength that never had to think, never had to change, never had to hear the word no and mean it. That kind of strength is the most fragile thing in the galaxy, and we've just proven it, and now everyone knows, and no amount of begging is going to make them unknow it. Sign the peace. It's the same peace. It was always the same peace, and it's still, even now, the best thing anyone's ever offered you. The overspeaker of Vaelth signed the peace. He signed it that night in the emptying throne hall under the departing stars, with his own guards standing weaponless around him and his empire dissolving out from under his feet. And he signed it because there was nothing else to sign and nowhere else to go. And Kesarai Voss watched him sign it and did not smile, not once, not even at the end. And that not smiling was reported in every telling of the day for 10,000 years afterward. The human who was handed the whole galaxy and refused to gloat, the young woman who could have had anything and asked only that the killing stop. The peace held. That was the strangest thing of all to the historians who came after, that a treaty signed in the ruins of an empire by a ruler who had begged for it actually held. But it held because humanity kept every word of it, exactly as it had kept every word for 14 years of humiliation, and because the galaxy had seen, at last and unforgettably, what humanity was. Not the strongest, not the cruelest, but the one species that could hold the throat of its enemy and choose, in front of everyone, to let go. The Concord of Vaelth did not survive as an empire. You cannot rebuild dominion once the dominated have seen it fall in an afternoon. It broke apart into its 1,100 worlds, and most of them chose their own way, and a few of them, the Vaelthi core worlds among them, chose to change slowly, painfully, generations of a proud people learning to be something other than masters. Whether they managed it, Kesarai Voss did not live to fully see. But she lived to see the beginning of it, and she said, near the end of her life, that the beginning was enough, that you do not get to see the whole harvest of a thing you plant, you only get to plant it well. They brought her home to a galaxy that had rearranged itself around her, and she hated the attention, and she gave the credit away with both hands to Tomarel, who had planned it, to the listeners who had learned the song, to the 900 who died in the camps and the volunteers who carried microphones inside their own bodies, to the 41 on the survey ship at the Sarin Drift who had recorded the first notes of the song with the last 90 seconds of their lives. She said, whenever they tried to make her the hero of it, I was the one who got to stand where everyone could see. That's not the same as being the reason. The reason was 14 years of people choosing not to fire first, when firing first would have been so much easier. I just got to be the face of the last day. Don't mistake the face for the work. And Geshmo Alan, the old Alan who had spoken the first forbidden name in the thrashing room, lived to go home. She went home to the world whose name she had not been allowed to speak for 200 years, and she spoke it there, out loud, standing on its soil, as many times as she wanted. And she planted in the free ground of that world a small tree, and she named the tree after a human child who had not smiled, and the tree outlived them both. The captured stars went home, all of them over the years, one at a time, each along its patient computed path back into the dark it had been stolen from. And it became a custom across the freed galaxy, on the night each star finally settled home, to gather and watch it go dark against the deep, and to tell the children the story, how the strongest empire that ever was had laughed at a young woman with a folder of paper, and refused her peace, and reached out to take her, and how moments later it had been begging, and how she had not gloated, not once, not even then, but had only asked again for the same thing she'd asked for at the start. For the killing to stop, and for everyone to go home. That was the story, that was the whole of it. And on the night the last stolen star finally reached its home and went dark into the deep, a very old woman with short gray hair sat outside under an open sky and watched it settle, and someone beside her, young, asked whether she was sad to see the last of them go. Kesarai Voss watched the star find its place in the dark where it belonged, and she thought about a folder of paper, and a stud that turned from green to red, and a hall full of laughter that had turned, in the space of an afternoon, into begging. No, she said, it's home, that's all any of us ever wanted. For everything to be allowed to go home. And she watched the last of them go dark, and she did not smile, but she was, at the very end, content, which is a better thing than a smile and lasts longer, and is much harder to take away. The galaxy had refused humanity's peace. Moments later, it had begged for it. And humanity, holding the whole of it in one open hand, had simply given it back, and asked for nothing but the quiet and the open doors, and the long, slow homecoming of every stolen thing.